Hello, everyone. It's CJ. Welcome to another live stream. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. It's a very special interview that we have for you today, as well as a watch party. Last night, we were able to do a watch party for Oliver Stone's documentary, Ukraine on Fire. And today, we're going to be doing a follow-up, one of the additional videos to that documentary, which is called Ukraine, 30 Years of Independence. Now, today's very special guest comes to us. She did previously interviews. She also interviewed quite a bit of the entire documentary that we're going to be watching, and that is Simona Mangiante Papadopoulos. And she is, again, just a vast background. She's a former advisor to the European Parliament. And also, she is the interviewer for Ukraine, the Everlasting Present. And that's the documentary that we're going to be watching today. And then also, she's a political commentator and the founder of her own company, which is, designer wear and all the things that she does. So very talented. It's an honor to have her as a guest. So I'm going to bring Simona in. So Simona, welcome. Great day. How are you?
Hi, CJ. Thanks so much for having me. I'm very well, and I thank you again for airing this documentary, which is very much interesting at the moment.
Yes. And Simona, I became familiar with the documentary to a previous interview that you had conducted, and I want to thank you for responding to the request to come on. These are very crucial times that we're currently monitoring. We're living in, the current in regards to the situation with Ukraine. And I really wanted to afford you, before we jump into the discussion and then also the watch party, could you share with our listeners a little bit more about yourself and how you became involved with the documentary and the making of the movie, please?
Thanks so much. So as you mentioned briefly before, I am an attorney by background. I graduated at university in Italy, and I did my internships in international law in the United States back in 2007 in Washington and New York. I then started to work for the European Union, and particularly first for the European Commission and then European Parliament, was I was administrator for a parliamentary body at the presidency office. So I worked there for 7 years before moving to the United States and starting a new career as an entrepreneur and following up my previous background by becoming a political commentator on European affairs. So that's how I was selected to become the lead interviewer of Ukraine 30 Years, The Everlasting Present, a film by Igor Lopatonok, which is a follow-up, part of a trilogy of political documentary about Ukraine, preceded by Ukraine on Fire, Revealing Ukraine, and last, Ukraine, The Everlasting Present. I have first of all, I would like to thank you for airing those content, which seems to be banned by big tech for a simple reason, not because it's propaganda by any means, but because it tells the audience facts. You can corroborate during the length of the documentary. Everything is backed up by evidence. Everything is told in those documentaries backed up by evidence, which is usually corroborated. And it's an eye-opener in a situation in which we have a war of propaganda first, and besides a war between two countries. Here it's not about picking a side. It's not about doing philanthropy of the war. Everybody's against the atrocity of the war. It's about understanding. Yes. And smearing whoever tries to understand the dynamics and the events that led to this tragic situation is unfortunately labeled as a propagandist, even worse, a Russian propagandist. So it's very important actually to walk the audience through the crucial events that led to the current situation, and that help everybody understanding how much of Western involvement in this country truly happened in this latest 30 years, since the declaration of independence from the Soviet Union to this war. Therefore, I really believe it's a very dense documentary of facts. It's very must pay a lot of attention. I had the chance to sit at a table with different leaders, the leaders who made the history of independent Ukraine.
Yes, yes. Yeah, very well said. And you couple of things that you stated that really resonated with me is that I don't think I can recall a time in history the amount of propaganda that's taken place in regards to Ukraine, and it's very one-sided. If you look at the Western media and the amount of information that's coming forth with Ukraine, yeah, they're pretty much wanting to control the narrative in regards to Ukraine, the events unfolding there, even to the point where they're eliminating anyone who contradicts what they're stating in the media with the shutting down of RT, with Sputnik. There's no counter narrative being placed. So I think the work that you did and the work that we're currently doing right now is an attempt to really hit the pause button. So that's number one. And then the second thing you said also that resonated with me is that no one wants an escalation here, right? Everyone's looking out for the best of mankind. No one wants violence, the loss of life, which is very tragic. But also the documentary that you've been involved with, you said that some things that in regards to explaining to people the vast history of Ukraine, and then also the events unfolding, whether it's the Maidan, the situation that unfolded with the major pivot and the regime change that occurred there. So would you like to walk through a little bit around, either one or two things, what you would like to share the most important thing is in regards to the public regarding it, or explain a little bit of the beginning stages of what unfolded in Ukraine?
Absolutely, and thanks for asking me. I will try to summarize as much as I can a very long and intense documentary, but let's try to chronicle the two main events that mark the Ukrainian modern history of Ukraine, which are one's date of 2004, notorious as Orange Revolution, and this happened when further the presidential election, pro-Russian President Yanukovych was elected president of Ukraine. This result, something that not many knows, was never accepted and recognized by US Congress, which had invested, we will see in the documentary how this happened, invested an enormous amount of money and expectation in the other candidate, President Viktor Yushchenko, pro-Western, married to an American citizen, who was in a younger age an ultranationalist in Ukraine, was an American of Ukrainian origins, and who had an office in Washington to report about Ukrainian affairs. Further, the result of this election in 2004, agency from the West, including NGOs and the CIA, triggered the so-called Orange Revolution, which was result in the overthrow of Yanukovych, the pro-Russian residents, in favor of pro-Western nationalists Viktor Yushchenko. Had a chance to sit at the table with Viktor Yushchenko for at least 5-6 hours and to make him very uncomfortable questions about his support to the people's movement, his endorsement by the ultranationalist party Svoboda, and also the fact that he granted the title of National Hero of Ukraine to Roman Shukovich, which happens to be somebody who cooperated with the German Nazi during the World War II. His support system were basically the ultra-right people's movement supporter, which we can comfortably qualify as Ukrainian Nazi. This event marks, it's actually one of the most emblematic when it comes to understanding the external management of Ukraine by the United States. Later on 2014, when Yanukovych at the time was president, because he achieved to be re-elected legitimately after his presidency collapsed, we experienced a new bloody revolution, which is known as Euromaidan, which was officially triggered by people discontent toward the halt in the negotiation between the European Union on one side and Yanukovych, Ukrainian leader, on the other side. Now, we really believe that the level of political awareness of the people was so pronounced to trigger such a bloodshed on the street and violent protest. This is truly unlikely. So again, we have evidence that we unfold during this documentary that shows an incredible manipulation of these dynamics that try to shape Ukrainian history toward a certain narrative. And we see the heavy involvement of the United States and heavy involvement of also of George Soros. And there is also a segment of the documentary in which Rudolph Giuliani explains exactly how he was founding this NGO that were intervening into shaping this narrative through different techniques and apparatus, including this soft influence that he achieved to realize among mostly the younger generation. So it's really more than we see, more than the mid-eye. There is a lot underneath the iceberg that we really did a very detailed job to uncover. I must say the producer of this documentary, director Igor Lopatonok, has been challenged with many questions. None of one single facts that we reported in these documentaries from the first to the last has been proved wrong. So everything was corroborated to be correct. And this is important nowadays when we have a lot of opinions, but we don't have enough facts. We have to understand that information, the job of journalists is now to manifest your opinion. We have a lot of emotions when we talk about war, but we live in a world where exist nuclear weapons, military to protect your countries. War is horrible, is atrocious. Nobody likes to watch these images. Everybody would like a smooth situation. Of course, nobody likes it. But on fact, there are facts we need to take into account to understand the situation without emotions and really make an assessment, an overlook on the entire geopolitical interests that are in play here, which are bigger than what we hear.
Yeah, I completely agree in terms of the amount of corruption that has occurred there in Ukraine, and a huge shift, and it's very unfortunate for the Ukrainian people in regards to the events unfolding. In particular, when you take a look at the potential loss of life, you see the major shift in the one side of the narrative where American people are believe that this is more about freedom and democracy, and that's very inaccurate. It's more about influence, power, and greed. Simona, what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely a great point. This is not a war for democracy. The democracy of Ukrainian has been already undermined by the West, the moment in which we turned Ukraine in a client state of the West. Just remember that Joe Biden had the power to have the special prosecutor looking into his son affairs with Burisma fired. So we understand the level of implication and the power that we exercise on their own determination. So there is everything but democracy that we try to help in this country. But when we let's take a step back. There are many interest, powers, a sphere of influence, geopolitical interest, nuclear, power potential that has been already dismantled a long time ago with an agreement which was very poor for Ukraine, and this will be in the beginning, will be detailed in the beginning of the documentary. But let's get back to democracy. Let's talk about democracy in the West. Do we really think we live in a free world? Where our voices are censored, where even the president of the United States has been taken down, his voice has been taken down by a private company like Twitter without any reasonable ground to believe that his voice was attempting, like no legal statement which certified that further due diligence, his voice was dangerous for a certain type of interest they were trying to portray as a sort of, insurrection. So there is no legal justification for such a decision, which is completely scary. Many voices or many people have been taken down. We are here discussing facts, trying to analyze the situation from the political and historical point of view, and we are labeled as propagandist. I myself, I've been attacked multiple times on social media for being pro-Russian. I'm not pro-Russian, not pro-Ukrainian, I'm pro-truth. And I think this should be the approach of everybody here. It's not about a football team. We're not here trying to say I stand with this. I stand with people of Ukraine, I stand with people of Russia, I stand with people from the West. But their interests are twisted, weaponized by few people that made of us a weapon for their own interest. All of us.
Yeah, very, very well said. And that's one thing that I really try to do in terms of my commentary and reporting is to really avoid the politicizing of this happening. And it's unfortunate, but I don't think that in the situation that we're in, where we're talking about the potential for potential even nuclear war, and I know that's a bit extreme, but regardless of that, to take a look at the potential that's loss of life, now is not the time to be like politicizing this. And unfortunately, that's what's happening. You're seeing too many people who are attempting to point fingers, point blame. And really what's happened is that, and again, just going back to the narrative, what you said specifically in regards to democracy, here in the United States. And unfortunately, too many of the legislatures in the West use it more as a talking point. It's not necessarily their independent beliefs in individual freedom, individual liberty is strictly a talking point. But when you look at that word democracy and you take a look at the freedom to choose, the freedom to decide what to read, who to listen to, and then you look at the amount of suppression, it's very hard to, it's a gray area. And unfortunately, we don't see that. To me, probably one of the largest characteristics of the loss of freedom that we have is the silence of Julian Assange. And I don't want to get too far away from this, but we see time and time again where independent journalists, people who are willing to talk and share the truth regarding it, are labeled as disinformation or labeled as Russian sympathizers. And it's very unfortunate. Like in primarily, I say when I say the West, I'm speaking more about in America. For whatever reason, America gets to choose to decide. This isn't about NATO. The United States basically is NATO, right? We fund the most, we have the most amount of influence, and I'm struggling to understand, like, why is this more about the West and the direction in NATO, and why isn't it more about the people of Ukraine and their lives moving forward, Simona? It's very disheartening to see what's happening, especially with Zelensky and his ability for people to understand that he's being propped up as this great leader, this big brave individual person, and when you peel back the layers and you understand his history and the vast amount of corruption to get him to the place where he be, it's easily debunked as far as him as a leader. What are your thoughts on that?
I disagree completely with this idealization of Zelensky. I think has shown loud his incompetence, and besides his incompetence, is a reckless expectation that the United States would include Ukraine in the NATO, or that the EU would include Ukraine in the EU bloc as a result of the war. This shows pretty loud is deep ignorance about whatever it means, even accessing one of these two realities, and putting on stake actually the life of his own people, not to accommodate a request that was pretty much reasonable to me, which was the neutrality of Ukraine, at least for that part. So without picking sides, I believe that when we look into the history of personal history of what Zelensky has done for his country, definitely has enriched very much his pockets with oligarchs.
Mm-hmm.
He has a fortune that is absolutely not justifiable by this position as a president and not even as a comedian. So it clearly is a corrupted person who's now trying to force Ukraine, which is a highly corrupted country, in the European Union, where there are specific standards to access European, there are targets
Right.
that country has to meet. So this is not about America, this is not about Russia, it's about Ukraine not meeting the criteria to be a member state of the European Union. And I believe the situation with NATO is even more different. It's all part of another conversation about diplomatic balances. We know that it's not a new topic since Gorbachev to Yeltsin. The inclusion of Ukraine to NATO was something that was completely out of question, because it would mean to allow NATO to expand to the borders of Russia. And we know how many countries since 1960s have been in Europe, became part of the NATO. So Ukraine was absolutely not in question. I believe there's something happened here, sort of a coercive diplomacy, we say, to trigger catastrophic response as the one we have seen could have been avoided. So now portraying Zelensky as this hero that is being attacked from nowhere by Russia and asked for unconditional support from the West at the cost also of even triggering a third world war is completely reckless. Also, to do not mention the ingratitude, because he has been he had the unprecedented support of the European Union as a whole, and he had massive financial and humanitarian aid sent to Ukraine. To do not mention that we sacrificed our own economies because of the sanctions we implemented with Russia. We know the prices of oil raised up in Europe and I believe also in the United States. Here in Italy, for example, we don't even have a self-sufficiency of wheat, where our food economy is all based on pasta and bread. So let's be realistic. It's not about emotions, it's about political analysis that are a bit clear and objective. Nobody wants war, nobody wants that, let alone expanding the conflict to countries that have nothing to do with what happened in Ukraine or that contributed to create a situation in Ukraine, and a situation that should have been resolved differently.
Yeah, absolutely. There's two things very important that I wanted to discuss with you, and the first thing is a very important document, very important documentation that was really established as a way forward in regards to Ukraine and their independence, and that was the Minsk Agreement. And
Yes.
within the Minsk Agreement, which most Americans, if unfortunate, one thing, Simona, you're going to learn about Americans, you probably already know this, but we're arrogant. We like to pat ourselves on the back consistently. But one of the things that we lack is sometimes is we're so much into the instant gratification of putting on a hashtag that I'm with Ukraine or putting an emoji with the flag on it. But most people don't take the time to really understand. And I think that from a perspective of why we arrived at the situation where we are, and not that I'm justifying or saying what Vladimir Putin and Russia did, but I really felt that he was continuously pushed in a corner.
Okay,
Russia and Putin were very transparent of what their requests were. Very simple points. They laid it out in a document that was shared with the entire world for the world to see in regards to what their requests were. And one of those were the first building stages that were honoring the original documentation in regards to the Minsk Agreement. So can you talk a little bit around that for us, please?
Yes, absolutely. I think, as you mentioned before, Russia has been very transparent about its intentions, the condition. We had also commitments as detailed in the Minsk agreement, so that we're willfully part of and we entered into. But we completely neglected all the precondition that led to these events. We completely neglected Russian interests. Actually, we're busy building up the idea of Russia as the enemy, even when we think about the events of the Russiagate or whatever. I mean, Russia has been always portrayed as the enemy. So when finally we disregard all the commitment, including the ones documented that everybody can simply have access to, we find ourselves in the position that it's easy to blame Putin. Putin is crazy. Sometimes I read articles, Putin is crazy, Putin is out of his mind, Putin is a dictator, Putin is a martyr.
Right.
Well, the reason of the war are much deeper than that. That's really like an emotional response that disregard all the events that led to the situation. We have our own responsibilities we are avoiding looking into. But when you watch this documentary, probably your audience can have a really better understanding of how we arrived to this situation, including to these agreements we're mentioning now. There is a really clear message from Russia, from Putin, and we disregarded it all.
Yeah.
Triggering a situation which was obviously against Russia. A leader of a country, of course, makes the interest of its country, and when it's threatened at its borders, that's what. When I'm simplifying a very complex situation that you can see unfold in 2 hours documentary, but definitely there is much more to the story than the one that is portrayed by the mainstream media. And it looks like the mainstream media become one voice right now, because nobody really dig into the reasons or dig into the facts, the history, and go a little bit behind, starting from the Soviet Union. We have a long story.
Yeah.
We have a long story with Russia.
Absolutely. And yeah, the vast history that a lot of Westerners don't understand, the 100+ years history of Ukraine and going back to the world wars. So I think it was important that people understand that, and then definitely they will be able to see and hear what that looked like when we do the watch party in regards to the documentary. So that's one of the things that we hear primarily. We don't hear primarily is one of the things is the Minsk agreement. The second part, that the narrative that's being built here, and sometimes the American media tries to shrug it off, and that's talking about in regards to Vladimir Putin and his saying that he wants to denazify Ukraine in regards to eliminate that. And in the States, what we hear is, Americans and the news media make fun of that because they're like, well, what do you mean Nazis in Ukraine? They have a Jewish president in Zelensky. Could you talk briefly a little bit around the influence of the alt-right, the I don't want to call them radicalization, because I think that they've existed there for quite a while, of how that has been able to influence the, not only from the military perspective, but also in terms of them choosing who the president is going to be. Can you talk a little bit around that?
Absolutely. First and foremost, I would like to make a little step back to the time, to the year in which 1991, when Ukraine withdrew from the Declaration of Independence for the Soviet Union. The economy had a radical change. We assisted to the privatization of the Soviet Union property, which led to a stratification of society between oligarchs and the rest. So now, under this condition, we assisted to an impoverishment of the country, and we know that every time the poverty can be politically compensated by building up ideals. That's where under Kravchuk, which is the first president of independent Ukraine, we see starting taking place this idea of the exclusive role of Ukraine in the world, and how we should even support the creation of a different, like a national church of Ukraine. That's why Kravchuk supported also Filaret, which was the archbishop in a bad relation with Moscow, who was advocating for the creation of a Kiev patriarchate. So we have different, this independence was built up from the religious point of view to the political point of view, using as unifying idea the confrontation with Russia. Now, it happens to be the people's movement, let's say all the ultranationalist parties, Vodoba, are the same parties supported by the West, which means all the political leaders aiming to be a rapprochement of Ukraine to the West were nationalists supported by Nazi. That's in this extent that we hear about the denazification of Ukraine, because there is this overlap between those who are supported by the West in these pro-Western policies, and the people's movement, Svoboda, and all this nationalist party. Even in Donbass, we know that it's an identity situation brought to the extreme, where the nationalists are killing Ukrainians with Ukrainians for now 8 years, but only now we are concerned. So we always want to talk about Viktor Yushchenko, because he's one of the most popular presidents in the United States. We know him being very close to political leader in the United States, and he's the one who was actually proudly talking about the so-called Nazi as eminent nationalist patriots, which there is not much to understand. You don't take so much to understand that you can build the idea of independent Ukraine around this idea of confrontation with Russia, separation with Russia, at the same time supported by people's movement and the ultra-right nationalist movement. It's a very complicated history, but Nazism is a reality, and when we fight, let's say, the denazification, we are basically talking about those people who build up the unified identity of Ukraine based on the support of the Nazi.
Yeah. Yep. Simona, I know you don't have a magic crystal ball for my next question for you, but how do you see this unfolding in your opinion? What are your thoughts? How do you see this unfolding as far as how this moves forward?
I definitely see Europe losing in this war. I mean, like in the geopolitical balances, there is, of course, economic interests of Europe are on stake. We played completely the wrong game. But as far as concerned Russia, Ukraine, I think at some point we will reach to the point where most of the coast from Mariupol is already taken over by Russia. We will see what's going to happen to Odessa, but this is a strategic area of Russia that definitely now has a Russian, of Ukraine that has a Russian imprinting. United States, of course, leverage in a very bad way. It's diplomacy, power to about the situation, to trigger the situation in a certain sense. I don't see Russia, Ukraine being part of NATO. I think it's pretty clear. Even Zelensky will give up this ambition. On the other side, I don't think Ukraine is any way close to access the EU bloc. Even before, after the war, this won't mean much to the European Union legislator that define the criteria to be part of to be a member of the European Union. So I just see, of course, a loss of life, and I hope this will stop as soon as possible. I hope diplomacy will intervene. But I don't see Ukraine as a winner in the situation, as many people, for example, many mainstream media are portraying Ukraine as winning this conflict. I don't see it at all based on the facts. I see there is a lot of propaganda. It's very difficult to even select information in this entire situation. But definitely, I see in the geopolitical balances a strong Russia and a strong China.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, I'm praying and hoping that calm heads can prevail, and that Zelensky will do the right thing for the Ukrainian people, as opposed to running the risk of additional loss of life, which is completely unneeded, Simona. So, if you could do us a favor, if you want to share your social media links where people can follow you and more about your work, I'd greatly appreciate it.
Thank you so much. So you can follow me on Twitter on Real Simona MP. And you can follow me on Instagram on Simona_Mangiante_.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And I want to thank you, Simona, for a fantastic interview. I appreciate your time coming on to share. Very, you're absolutely very excited to watch the documentary for the second time. I watched it through the first time. I'm going to watch it for a second time today. And for our listeners, again, just thank you for tuning in. Please do us a favor. Please like and share this across the numerous platforms that this is being live streamed to, whether you're on Twitch, Float, DLive, Facebook, Twitter, wherever you're watching this from, hit that share and that like button so that we can counter the narrative that's being built by the mainstream media in regards to the situation with Ukraine. So Simona, thank you so much. And I look forward to chatting with you again someday soon.
Thank you so much, and enjoy the film. Thanks so much for airing this content, and enjoy the watch party. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. All right. Enjoy your day. Thank you.